The verse of the day is Romans 8:15 through 17, and it says, "So you have not received a spirit that makes you fearful slaves. Instead, you received God's Spirit when He adopted you as His own children. Now we call Him Abba, Father, for His Spirit joins with our spirit to affirm that we are God's children. And since we are His children, we are His heirs. In fact, together with Christ, we are heirs of God's glory. But if we are to share His glory, we must also share His suffering." I don't know about you guys, but I'm feeling fired up today when it comes to fighting fear. The devil is a freaking liar, and he has no right to be here. In fact, today's verse reminds us we were not given a spirit of fear. Instead, we were adopted into God's family through the Holy Spirit. And I love this visual, and I love the way today's verses break it down, because this same spirit that rose Jesus back to life literally defeated death. Think about it. Jesus never sinned. He was a perfect man. So the grave could not hold him, because death is a consequence of sin. This is why we all die. We have that same spirit living in us. We are adopted into God's family. The reason why you and I get relationship with Jesus is because of the Holy Spirit, because Jesus left the same spirit that defeated death on earth for you and I, so that we could be in right standing, right relationship with God, because that same spirit gives us freedom over sin. And that's not to say we're going to be perfect, but we get to progress. We get to defeat sin more and more. We get to learn how to break out of bad habits and to stop agreeing with lies and stand in the authority that you and I carry over fear and anxiety. And so if you're having fear or anxiety come at you, you get to speak against it and command it to leave, because that's not your spirit. That's not the spirit God gave you, and you have a spirit that has power over that spirit. We weren't given a spirit that makes us fearful slaves. We instead were given a spirit that makes us God's children, adopted into God's family, which is really good news, because if we are the heirs of God, what is our inheritance? All the power He carries, all the fruit that God carries. The kingdom of heaven is our inheritance. And so we get to tap into the fruit of the Holy Spirit. Peace, love, joy, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. That is our inheritance. And so we just have to remind ourselves, because it's so easy for us as human beings to believe lies and to doubt, because we're battling. We're in a battle, you guys, until the day we die. And so we get to learn how to fight better. Every day, you and I get to learn how to stand our ground better, to fight against all the lies, to command fear and anxiety to leave, and to rely on the power of the Holy Spirit. When I think about the fact that you and I have the Holy Spirit in our heart, and how that makes us in right standing with God, and how that gives us power over sin, it makes me think about DNA. So in our families, right, we share the same DNA. Our siblings, we share the same DNA, which makes us family. The Holy Spirit gives us the DNA of heaven. So this is how we're able to be in right standing with God. Think about it. The Holy Spirit consumes your heart. It now sets you free from the bondage of sin. And we get the inheritance of heaven because we have the power necessary to defeat sin, to no longer be slaves to it. Now we have the Spirit necessary to become more and more righteous every day, to become more and more like God's heart every day. Verse 16 says, "For His Spirit joins with our spirit to affirm that we are God's children." The last sentence I think is important too. It says, "But if we are to share His glory, we must also share His suffering." Jesus learned obedience through suffering. Jesus suffered, right? Before He was taken away in the garden, He was so distressed. He was sweating blood. So even Jesus, a perfect man, experienced high levels of stress. He wasn't void of being attacked, but He had the perfect power to withstand every attack. He never gave in to temptation. He always withstood all temptation and all fear that tried to come at Him. He said, "Lord, if there's any other way, I would love to do that, but your will be done." And for you and I, when we experience fear and worry and anxiety, we get to remember, oh, even Jesus was stressed, but He chose to turn His eyes and say, "Lord, help me get through this. If you could take away this burden, if you could take away this circumstance, that would be great, but your will be done," because He's using it for a greater purpose. The reason why Jesus had to endure in that moment was because there was a greater purpose and mission that He had to walk to, that He had to walk through. And because He walked through that and suffered for our sake, we now get freedom. we now get to experience the love of God, the love of the one who created us, and we get power over all of the things that shrink who we are. And so Jesus had to suffer in order to create a greater mission. And for you and I, when we experience fear and worry and anxiety, sometimes it's there to teach us how to fight back and how to ignore it, and how to teach us how to stand in the authority that you and I carry, because we weren't given a spirit of fear. We are not fearful slaves. We are God's children, and we are the heir of his family. We get to have access to his inheritance, which is freedom over sin. The devil is going to try to get you to believe that you don't have the authority that you actually do with the power of the Holy Spirit. That's how he's going to get you to agree with his lies. But we have to remember, no, God did not give me this spirit. This is a lie. God gave me a spirit of power, love, and a sound mind. This spirit has power over all evil. And I get to stand in that authority, and I get to withstand any amount of suffering or torment that this thing is going to try to bring me, because my God is greater than this. Does he know how great my God is? Does that thought know how great my God is? Does that fearful or worrisome thought know how big my God is? It reminds me of David and Goliath. He went after Goliath, even though he was the least likely to defeat him. But Goliath didn't intimidate David. He might have felt fear, but he faced him as if he said, does he know how big my God is? Who is Goliath to defy the king of the world? Who is Goliath to defy my God who created everything? And so when these Goliaths come at you, when those fearful thoughts or anxious thoughts come at you, speak to them and tell them, do you know how big my God is? I disagree with you, and I decide to agree with what God says about me, that he didn't give me a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. And I get to stand in that authority, and I get to command fear to go, and I get to trust that God is going to continue to hold my hand no matter how much fear or anxiety I feel, because I get to learn obedience through suffering. I get to see God show up in the midst of my suffering, and that actually keeps me dependent. And I get to say, but God, your will be done. Even if I'm feeling layers of suffering, Jesus suffered. We have his spirit, so it makes sense that the enemy would try to attack us in the same ways, because we carry the spirit of Jesus. And so if we continue to fight the spirit of fear like Jesus did, then we get to continue to set people free. So we get to be vessels of Jesus, right? We are vessels of the Holy Spirit. So we get to continue to release that freedom to the world through our understanding of the authority that you and I carry as his children. So declare these verses over your life and say them out loud, you guys, because it's going to rise up this courage and authority in you that you carry, because you have been adopted into God's family, and the spirit of fear is not yours. Okay?